to keep Americans safe. And as I'll discuss in a few moments, the notion that American life is more precious than others and anything goes when it comes to protecting Americans is morally abhorrent and reactionary. And the kind of poisonous complicity that allows empires to invade foreign countries and savage the populations there. We're talking about 1 million people dead in Iraq. I mean, I won't even get into what I saw in Iraq in the 1990s as a result of sanctions. That's for another time. So, the people at the top of the Bush regime actually did. They saw themselves at war. But this wasn't a war to end terror. This was a war that utilized terror on a massive scale. This wasn't a war whose aims were fundamentally directed at simply preventing attacks on U.S. soil. And make no mistake, September 11th was a horrific attack. As I document in my book, the leaders of the Bush administration had a vision of radically reshaping and restructuring the entire globe, beginning in Central Asia and the Middle East. And based on that deeper control, and these are areas that the U.S. had, you know, especially the Middle East, had been basically under U.S. control since World War II. But on the basis of this greater control, the U.S. would aim to create an unchallenged and unchallengeable empire. Now, that's a very radical assertion, backed up by words spoken directly by people like Condoleezza Rice, Donald Rumsfeld, Dick Cheney, and so on and so forth. And again, this is something I document in my book extensively. So this isn't Larry Everest giving his interpretation on what the Bush administration sought to do. These were their declared objectives, although something very, very rarely discussed and analyzed in the mainstream media. So this was a radically different kind of war and different conception, and it demanded radically different sorts of measures. I mentioned preemptive war. These were people who had a vision of overthrowing 7 governments in 5 years. Beginning with Afghanistan, moving quickly to Iraq, following through with Libya, Iran, Syria, and so on. This sort of a war and creating an unchallenged empire demanded a number of things. One it demanded was crushing, breaking, and terrorizing the population of these regions which were to be controlled, in particularly the Islamic fundamentalists who had become a significant obstacle to the United States in this quest. Now, I see the clash with the United States and Islamist movements, whether it be the Ayatollahs in Tehran or Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, as a clash of 2 reactionary and outmoded social forces that reinforce each other even as they're clashing with each other. Again, I'm giving people a quick overview here. There's a lot more to say on all this. But the U.S. saw people in these movements as an obstacle. If it had been communist, they probably would have adopted the same techniques toward them as well, or radical nationalists. Whatever stood in their way had to be crushed. Hence the logic of torture, which is not simply to extract information, but as General Janis Karpinski testified at the Bush Crimes Commission that we held in 2005 and 6, and I would encourage people to get the DVD back there. This was an effort to prepare the conditions for interrogation for a whole population, in the case of Iraq, to terrorize people. This This was also an effort, and one of the key components of what the United States did after September 11th, to assert U.S. global credibility, which is based on military force and power, and show that the United States had the will to crush all and any opponents. This creating an unchallenged and unchallengeable empire also meant reshaping alliances, restructuring law, restructuring morality and ideology. Hence, the notion that the Geneva Conventions were quaint. I believe that was you or Bybee, one of them. I can't recall. Gonzalez, thank you. So, this was another dimension of the underlying logic of what was being done. There was a perfidious, foul, reactionary logic at work here, and we need to confront and understand this. There's a huge ideological component to the issue of torture. First, it sends a signal to any, whether in this country or elsewhere, who might oppose the U.S. This could happen to you. The equivalent of showing Galileo the instruments of torture. And the other ideological component, again, Danner points out, torture stands as a marker of political commitment, a willingness to do anything to protect the American people. In other words, American exceptionalism, American life counts. Other people's lives don't count. So this, too, was a necessary component from their point of view. If you're going to be waging, remember, an unbounded